Welcome to the weekly duck migration forecast for the week of 11 through 17 January. For all you folks that got snow at southern latitudes, I thought I'd use a startup photo here of a Chesapeake of mine that's passed a few years ago in a New York snowstorm. So enjoy the snow you've got. I'm going to kind of cover that and talk about the potential for additional cold weather into the coming weeks of January. As a lot of you know, you can email me your questions at weeklyduckmigrationforecast@gmail.com. I got a lot of questions last week. I've addressed a lot of them just directly by email, and I'll get to the rest of them in the near future here, hopefully today. I did get a question. I think I might have got this question previously, but wanted to clarify on this one. Brent from Arkansas, and he's between the White and Cache River in Arkansas, a wonderful part of the world. I'm kind of jealous for folks that live in that area as duck hunters, but a great part of the waterfall world between the White and Cache Rivers. Brent asks, what weather or other signals do you look for when forecasting the migration back north? And what he was asking about is a reverse migration. And what he sees is that a lot of ducks fly over him, go to the coast, and then at a later date, he thinks they show up. At least he's seeing additional birds later, and is attributing that to reverse migration. I will tell you this from a purely data-driven standpoint. I would say that we don't have a lot of information on reverse migration. We do know that on dry years, birds they're going to find water. So they will overfly, they will go to coastal regions, and then they will move out of those regions when the conditions are right. I'm going to speculate here because, as I said, we don't have empirical or data-driven information really to a large degree on this topic. I think if anything, we have it for pintails because pintails are known for this type of behavior. Very much linked to coastal wetlands relative to a lot of other of these dabbling ducks that we're providing forecasts for. So lots of times pintails actually overfly. If you think about it, as migration gets going, we really haven't hit those winter snow and melts at northern and mid latitudes, and we haven't hit those rains, those winter rains that really recharge wetlands. A lot of plants haven't shut down yet. One of the things that enables rivers and wetlands to rise is actually that plants stop taking up water, in addition to the late fall and winter rains that can help fill wetlands. So what these birds will do when it's relatively dry is overfly, go to coastal regions, and then when we do get these abundant rains, like last week's event, which was a snow event and a rain event, depending upon where you were at, and then a melt event if you were in that snow belt, what happens is these birds follow those systems back, some distance north, and Arkansas is easily within that range. So pintails will just blow up off the coast in a star-like pattern, going in every direction, really looking to find that water and new food. So, what are you looking at is substantial rain or snow and melt events that happen. And so what's driving birds at, say, the latitude of the boot heel of Missouri south largely is availability of water, food, and disturbance, right? So if you get a time where you have a new water event that establishes new habitat, it floods food, and those birds can feed in there relatively undisturbed for some period of time. There's a really good chance that you can set up on them on a Saturday morning and have a great shoot. So don't ever ignore the disturbance factor, right? These birds will only tolerate so much until even as good as the habitat might be, they're just not gonna stay. They're just not gonna take a constant pounding. So consider those things, Brent. This is a great question. I think it's something that in the research community we'd like to know a little bit more about. I think some of my colleagues in Tennessee, at that latitude where we don't tend to get a lot of hard freezes, are radio marking and satellite telemetry tracking mallards and other species right now, and might be able to answer some of these kind of quote unquote reverse migration questions a bit better in the future. But I think this is a good one. I think we all want to know what makes these birds kind of move around once they're down at that latitude, which I think, less than normal years, but a good number of our right now. So thanks a lot, Brent. And folks, keep your questions coming. I want to cover the polar vortex again. Did get a question or two about it as well. And the polar vortex or polar vortex disruption's been in the news a lot lately, with the idea that we have a polar vortex disruption coming, and that means really strong cold outbreaks that could come into the Mississippi and Atlantic flyway in the coming weeks. The fella that I worked with in the past and that produces a lot of the information on the polar vortex is Judah Cohen. The link to his blog is down below. Actually, he produces his blog by usually Monday afternoon or Monday night, which covers this. It's extremely technical. I want to warn you of that if you write this down and go to it. But he says at this point we are in stage 4 of 6 that will cause a polar vortex disruption. And by looking at long-term kind of weather patterns and forecasts and what the Arctic Oscillation and such is doing, it really looks like, for the short term here, is that we probably aren't going to be in a really strong polar vortex disruption, which would cause a lot of cold air to come south. For example, if we look at Sunday, the 17th of January at around 11 in the morning, this is the ISO lines. The blue is anything in blue is below freezing. And then the arrows are the wind direction on there. And I put kind of red arrows to kind of follow the wind direction. And this is kind of like the short end of a polar vortex disruption. This isn't really a disruption. This is kind of a very typical jet stream for this time of year. And we see a lot of, holding of cold air near the poles. So I don't see anything until maybe around the 20th of January, which suggests any type of polar vortex disruption, but it's something maybe to keep our eyes out for. So my comment is keep your ear to the ground on this polar vortex news, but it hasn't become anything that is really going to push cold air at any. It's not going to happen tomorrow. We're in stage 4 of 6, which really causes this right now. So it's going to happen this winter. I think mostly it's going to happen February and March. So the big news is the snow event that happened at southern latitudes. But one of the things I want to really point out to people here is that just because you have snow doesn't mean that the ducks are going to show up. If you look at that mid-latitude area, yeah, there's ice, but there's not a lot of snow cover. Your local birds might react to this, and you might have got some really cool hunts in snowy conditions, and congrats if you did. But that these types of conditions don't always relate to what's going on at northern latitudes. We got a really good cold shot late this weekend and early this week, and hopefully that's good. I'll talk here in a bit. We had a really major warming at about this time of year last year in 2020 in January, and you can see how we really lost snow substantially across a good swath of the Mississippi and Atlantic flyways. So again, this we look at today by 5 p.m. The freeze line is going to be really far north. So yeah, there was a snow event, but I don't know that this really substantially affected birds in that mid latitude area. Again, it's just been a relatively mild year. Again, if you look at last year, there was a really mild event at this time, which was really detrimental to the end of season for folks. I think if anything, we're probably going to improve this year. But think about the fact, what I'm trying to say to folks that got snowed on is that doesn't mean just that everything up north is also snowy and cold. So time to remember that. And then we do have a warm up coming. So by Thursday at noon, I mean, if you look at these temperatures, we're going to thaw back out all the way far north as central New York. We're barely ice fishing. We've got maybe 3 to 4 inches of ice on some lakes, and most lakes are still wide open. So there's a lot a lot of habitat. This is going to come with, if you look at the arrows, those are going north with the wind, a lot of southerly flow. So mid, Wednesday to Thursday, not looking great for migration, bookended by some reasonable cold weather early and late. So if we go to the summary for the week, the greatest WSI values for mallards and black ducks will be early and late in the week for both flyways, but they're really not great enough to cause any predicted migration. So I wouldn't look for any substantial mallard movement during the coming week. Movements of other dabbling ducks, pintails, gadwall, shoveler, greenwings, widgeon are likely early and late in the week, but I wouldn't expect substantial migrations. We again just haven't had anything in the near term here to cause any really substantial movements. Not that the birds aren't trickling around, but not substantial movements. There is a warm-up event Wednesday through Friday, moving across the continent. And after last week's rains, river gauges really quickly declined, and many areas really remain pretty dry. So birds are really seeking out water where they can find it, and good habitat where there's food without disturbance. I really think we should watch for the possibility of a polar vortex disruption starting around the 20th of January. That's super optimistic. I think it's going to be later than that for any substantial event to occur. But let's keep our eye out, and I'll be able to tell you more on this by next week. We're actually better than last year at this time when there was a substantial warming event in January. If you keep records or anything and go back, I mean, it was bad. It was balmy, downright balmy at mid and southern latitudes. So I'll, in future episodes, or at least the whole season wrap up, I'll cover a full comparison of WSI values, from October through January for folks. So look for those full summaries in future episodes. And again, at the end of, I do these through the last week in January, but I also do a full season kind of review of the situation as far as weather and duck migration as well. So keep your eye out for that. So into the tables, Wisconsin, latitude of Wisconsin and Iowa, I'd say mallards are really froze out. Most wildlife management areas just aren't counting birds there anymore. They're gone. So they're somewhere kind of between there and Memphis, and some of them further, places further south. But as you start to go east, if you look at, mid-Ohio, New York, DC, Charlotte, like if you're in the Atlantic Flyway and you're not seeing mallard and black duck, don't feel bad. I mean, they're really there's been a few shots which moved birds, but since then it's warmed up. So, if you got birds, good. But to a large degree, they're where they're going to be for this week. I wouldn't expect massive movements of either of these species in the coming week. Pintail looks a little better, right? Early in the week, if we look right through the 11th there, even at the latitude of Memphis, we see some movement. So I'd expect some pintails in the Mississippi Flyway have really made, some movements further south in the coming week. And then, in the Atlantic Flyway, it's pretty weak. I mean, the threshold here is -4. All these, today is the best chance for any real movement towards the Mississippi Flyway. Atlantic Flyway, those numbers are just past the threshold. So if anything, these birds are trickling south. Unfortunately, just not a large movement expected. Gadwall, I think, these are cumulative weather severity indices for a lot of these species where, the accumulation of cold days makes a big difference. So I'm actually expecting, if anything, your Gadwall, right, your shoveler, your widgeon and green-winged teal, to make, if anything's going to make movements, I'd say these birds are going to get going. I keep hearing about a lot of green-wings still hanging in Missouri. And my expectation is that as we keep getting, hopefully, icing events in those areas, that's going to make some push of these birds out. Because some of these, the WSI is, a fair bit lower than, or worse, let's say, than the threshold. So let's hope for those movements. Again, best bet would be those birds, but I just don't see anything substantial given the The jet stream is pretty flat. We don't get a lot of wobble in it, and not a lot of super cold outbreaks. But again, early and late in the week's your best bet, so go for it. River gauges this week, as I said, if we kind of look along that area where that rain came through, they've really dried out for the most part. In a lot of places, western Arkansas at least looks a little bit better in some spots, but a lot of folks are dry. I mean, this is just a testament to how well these rivers are engineered and how quickly, on the right conditions, they can get water kind of off the landscape so that they're back into that normal range. Um, fairly dry conditions continue. And then, in the Northeast, and we dried out. The Mid-Atlantic coast is still really wet, wetter than what I would say is normal. That's probably really holding birds up from making it to places, like South Carolina, Georgia, and such, because there's just a lot of habitat right now at mid-latitudes for birds, I think. So thanks a lot, folks. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We got a lot of subscribers last week. I really appreciate that. It's good to see the support. Got a lot of nice emails from folks. Send me your questions. Appreciate it. This is a lot of fun, and appreciate bringing this to everybody each week. So weekly duck migration forecast at gmail.com. Have a great week. Be safe and shoot straight. Thanks.